Sylvester Stallone found himself in trouble with a neighbor named Rick Harrison. Rick treated Stallone's garage, driveway, and EV charger like they were just convenient extensions of his own private empire. It all started when Rick moved in. Even though he had a perfectly good EV charger installed at his own place, working without any issues, somehow he preferred using Stallone's. How would you feel if you had a neighbor like that? Tell me in the comments below the video. It was a warm afternoon when Stallone glanced out of his kitchen window and spotted Rick's SUV awkwardly perched along his low wall. A thick orange charging cable snaked from Stallone's unit, around the oleander hedge, and into Rick's car. Stallone stared for a moment, wondering if he was imagining things. He wasn't. Coffee mug in hand, he stepped outside, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, Rick," he called out. "You do realize that's hooked up to my meter, right? It's not a public charger." Rick looked up from his phone, flashing that familiar pawn shop grin the world knew so well, and said, "Come on, Sly, we're neighbors. What's a little juice between friends?" Stallone, a man seasoned by bigger battles, but who still believed in respect, stayed polite. "It's not about the juice," he said. "It's about asking first." Rick chuckled like Stallone had just told a good joke and promised it wouldn't happen again. Stallone, with a naive flicker of hope, believed him. 2 mornings later, it happened again. And again the following week. Sometimes in broad daylight, sometimes under the stars of the desert sky, Rick would sneak over, drag the cable across the wall, and hook up his Rivian without so much as knocking. One night, reviewing his security footage, Stallone caught Rick creeping across his driveway like a teenager sneaking into a neighbor's pool. It would have been funny if it weren't so brazen. Stallone realized talking alone wouldn't fix this. He printed a large, clear sign. "Private charger. Do not use without permission. Unauthorized vehicles will be penalized." He laminated it, staked it next to the charger, and returned to his peaceful life of tinkering with his Mustang and jotting notes for a possible autobiography. Rick saw the sign and laughed. Less than a day later, Stallone caught him again on the motion alert from his phone. Same Rivian, same sneaky cable drag, same petty theft. Rick's own charger sat untouched, just 20 yards away, gleaming under the desert sun. Maybe it was the thrill. Maybe it was pure stubbornness. But one thing was clear. Rick had no intention of stopping. The HOA wasn't any help. Stallone sent an email, complete with timestamps and security footage. Their reply was predictable. "We encourage neighborly communication to resolve personal disputes." Translation: "You're on your own, Rocky." Sylvester Stallone wasn't a man who sought confrontation, not anymore. Age had tempered him, taught him the value of patience over punches. But he still believed in lessons, real lessons, the kind that matter. He needed a plan that could teach Rick without crossing the line. He picked up the phone and called his nephew, Nick Stallone, a bright kid working in cybersecurity down in San Diego. Nick loved 2 things: fast tech and outsmarting people who thought they were the cleverest in the room. During a weekend visit, Stallone laid it all out. "I don't want to wreck his car," Stallone said. "I just want him to feel it, understand it." Nick grinned like a mechanic handed a busted Ferrari. "You want a little payback?" he asked. "No," Stallone corrected him. "I want balance." By Sunday afternoon, the system was installed. Nothing flashy. All the real magic was hidden. A switch inside Stallone's garage controlled two modes: normal charging for his Ford Lightning and a special mode for uninvited guests. In special mode, the charger would simulate a normal session, but would slowly siphon power from any attached vehicle, channeling it into a heavy-duty backup battery bank hidden behind Stallone's tool cabinets. To the untrained eye, the charger would blink green, the Rivian would display charging, but in reality, it would be trickling its precious energy back into Stallone's private grid, a gentle siphon, death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Nick even installed a small secondary meter to track every kilowatt-hour recovered, sending live updates straight to Stallone's phone. It was beautiful, precise, silent. 2 nights later, at exactly 10:48 p.m., the camera pinged. Stallone, relaxing in his living room, sipping black coffee from an old Rocky III mug, smiled as Rick's SUV slid into frame, parking in the usual spot. He watched, phone in hand, as Rick looped the cable over the wall like a thief's rope, plugged in, and settled into his seat, probably scrolling through eBay for vintage wristwatches or autographed baseballs. Stallone waited 30 seconds, thumb hovering over the app. Then he tapped. Special mode activated. Somewhere in the garage, a tiny relay clicked. Rick's Rivian, blissfully unaware, began quietly bleeding its battery into Stallone's backup system. Morning came. Stallone sat on his porch, reading the paper, as Rick drove past. No words were exchanged. But Stallone caught the slight furrow in Rick's brow, the tiny hesitation at the end of the driveway, the quick glance at his Rivian's dashboard, like he was doing some mental math. It had begun. 3 days later, it happened again. And again. Each time, Rick's vehicle left lighter than it arrived. Meanwhile, Stallone's battery reserves steadily grew stronger. Nick had even programmed a cheerful auto notification. Congratulations, 2.3 kilowatt hours added to reserve. Like a miniature medal ceremony after every small theft. Rick must have started noticing. His behavior shifted. He began parking a little closer to Stallone's wall, as if sheer proximity could somehow fix the mysterious energy loss. He started double-checking the cable connection, glancing around nervously, like a kid caught sneaking cookies. Stallone, watching from the shade of his porch, said nothing. It wasn't time yet. Late Friday night, Rick knocked on Stallone's door, an awkward smile plastered across his tanned face. Stallone answered, letting the screen door creak open. "Hey, Sly," Rick said. "You ever have any problems with that charger? My car's been acting weird. Range dropping after a charge. Real strange." Stallone tilted his head slightly, like hearing about a rare desert weather phenomenon. "Weird," he said, voice even. "Maybe those new Rivians are buggy. You should probably get it checked." Rick nodded, clearly uncomfortable, sensing something he couldn't quite name. He shuffled away without pushing the matter further. Stallone leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and smiled. The trap was set, and Rick, stubborn as ever, would be back. Just the way Stallone wanted it. Rick didn't stop. Over the next week, Stallone's security system logged 4 more unauthorized sessions. Each time, Rick's Rivian contributed a little more to the hidden battery banks humming quietly behind Stallone's tool cabinets. The numbers climbed steadily, small but satisfying. Stallone almost admired the man's tenacity if it wasn't rooted in entitlement. Watching the footage became a nightly ritual. Rick creeping over, dragging the cable with less and less caution, utterly convinced that whatever bad luck he was experiencing had to be someone else's fault. One morning, Stallone added up the figures. Rick had unknowingly donated nearly 12 kilowatt hours so far. Not exactly gold bullion, but the principle was priceless. Stallone kept things polite in public, tipping his hat when they crossed paths on the street, exchanging neighborly hellos, like nothing was wrong, all while Rick's battery continued to fund Stallone's backup system. It would have gone on indefinitely if Rick hadn't escalated. The real trouble started when Rick, clearly frustrated with his dwindling range, decided it was time to involve the homeowners association directly. One sunny afternoon, Stallone found a neatly folded notice in his mailbox, stamped with the official HOA logo. The complaint was short but absurd. Unauthorized energy transfer, suspected interference with electric vehicle charging, investigation requested. Stallone chuckled. Rick wasn't even accusing him openly. He was framing it like Stallone's charger was broken and somehow sabotaging Rick's car through sheer negligence. It was the perfect mixture of cowardice and blame shifting. Knowing the HOA's tendency toward bureaucracy over common sense, Stallone decided it was time to get a little more public with the situation. The next weekend, Stallone printed a larger, bolder sign and mounted it directly above the charger. Warning: private charger, unauthorized use, may result in energy loss, experimental system in operation, use at your own risk. To make sure there was no ambiguity, he laminated it, bolted it to a sturdy metal pole, and even added a reflective strip so it would glow at night under Rick's headlights. Predictably, it changed nothing. 2 nights later, Rick was back, plugging in as if the warnings were written in invisible ink. Stallone, sipping whiskey by the window, waited until the cable locked into Rick's Rivian before tapping the special mode switch again. Power began draining smoothly into the backup cells. Nick's system now logged every session with timestamps and precise energy recovery data. That night alone, Rick lost another 3.5 kilowatt hours. Stallone's app congratulated him with a soft chime, like a cash register in a quiet store. It came to a head the following Friday. Around 9 a.m., Rick stormed up Stallone's driveway, phone in hand, waving it like a protest flag. Stallone opened the door without urgency, leaning casually against the frame. Rick launched into his accusation without so much as a greeting. "You're screwing with my car, Sly. Tesla service said someone's draining my battery." Stallone raised an eyebrow. "You drive a Rivian, Rick." Rick faltered a moment, caught in his own fury. "Whatever, man. The point is, you're stealing my power, or something. It's illegal." Stallone didn't respond immediately. He simply pointed to the bold, laminated sign bolted above the charger. Rick read it, really read it, for the first time. His face twitched with the slow recognition that maybe, just maybe, he was the problem. "I never gave you permission to use my charger," Stallone said calmly, arms crossed. "I warned you, posted signs. You ignored them." Rick sputtered, shifting from foot to foot. "You can't just mess with people's cars." Stallone shrugged. "You can't just steal someone's electricity. Welcome to consequences." Rick's fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a man on the verge of either throwing a punch or bursting into tears. Without another word, he turned sharply and stomped back to his Rivian, peeling out of Stallone's gravel driveway so fast he kicked up a cloud of dust that floated lazily in the warm morning air. That evening, Stallone reviewed the security footage with Nick, laughing over Rick's outburst. "He's learning," Nick said between bites of pizza. "Very, very slowly." They decided to upgrade the system one last time, just for the sheer satisfaction of it. Nick installed a small external speaker hidden within the charger housing. In special mode, it would emit a low, descending tone every time unauthorized use was detected. A sad little electronic sigh that grew louder the longer the car remained plugged in. It wasn't damaging, just deeply, undeniably humiliating. They didn't have to wait long to see it in action. The very next night, Rick, perhaps thinking the confrontation had reset the board somehow, crept up once again. This time, Stallone watched live on his tablet as the cable connected. Within seconds, the descending tone activated a long, mournful "Whoa!" like a ghost being slowly deflated. Rick froze, glancing wildly around the darkened neighborhood. He yanked the cable out so fast he nearly fell over, dropping it into the gravel with a clatter. Stallone, sipping coffee on the porch, tipped his mug in silent salute. But Rick wasn't done yet. If he couldn't get justice through confrontation, and if stealth had failed, he would escalate to officialdom. 3 days later, Stallone received notice of a formal HOA dispute hearing. Rick had filed an official complaint accusing Stallone of tampering with community utilities and endangering residential property through unauthorized experiments. Stallone laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. It was absurd on its face. The charger was on private property, clearly marked, and Rick had no permission or right to use it. Still, Stallone respected the process. He spent an evening assembling a packet of evidence, security footage, screenshots of the app logs, photos of the signage, and a neatly typed timeline of events. He even printed out Nick's technical description of the system, complete with diagrams showing that the modifications affected only unauthorized users. The hearing took place in the HOA's small meeting room, a converted clubhouse that smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon disinfectant. About 15 residents showed up, mostly curious retirees, eager for drama. Rick strutted in first, armed with a highlighter marked HOA handbook and a folder of printouts. Stallone followed, dressed simply in jeans and a fitted polo, carrying a thin leather binder. The HOA chair, a retired Navy officer named Bill Parsons, called the meeting to order. Rick launched into a passionate tirade about property rights, fair use, and the dangers of unauthorized energy manipulation. He spoke for nearly 15 minutes, growing redder in the face with each passing minute. When it was Stallone's turn, he spoke softly, clearly, and let the evidence do the talking. He presented the security footage first. Rick plugging in, ignoring signs, repeatedly trespassing. Then the signage photos. Then the energy logs showing the silent donations Rick had been making to Stallone's private battery reserve. Finally, he played a short clip of Rick's own voice from the security mic. "You're screwing with my car, Sly." The room was silent for a long beat. Then Bob McIntyre, the HOA treasurer and amateur comedian, let out a soft chuckle he couldn't suppress. It broke the tension. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. The board deliberated for a full 5 minutes before issuing their decision. No violation by Stallone, case dismissed, and a friendly suggestion that Rick refrain from using other residents' property without permission. Stallone nodded graciously. Rick stormed out without another word, the folder of grievances clutched tightly in his fist like a soldier retreating from a lost battlefield. That night, Stallone sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the desert stars blink into life. In his garage, the batteries hummed contentedly. Somewhere down the street, Rick's Rivian sat plugged into his own charger. At last, no longer daring to cross the boundary. For the first time in weeks, peace had returned to the neighborhood. But Stallone knew human nature too well to trust it completely. He kept the switch installed, the signs posted, and the cameras rolling. After all, some lessons had to be taught more than once. For a few blessed weeks, Rick stayed away. Stallone found a new rhythm again, walking his property in the cool mornings, polishing the hood of his Mustang with slow, circular motions, savoring the heavy, lazy quiet of desert life. The battery bank grew fat and ready with reserve power, a quiet trophy that reminded him of how patience and a little cleverness could win battles without fists. Neighbors would nod at him with a new kind of respect now when they passed. A few even joked lightly about juice theft and Rivian robberies over backyard fences. Stallone took it in stride. He wasn't a man who enjoyed embarrassing others, not really. He believed people should learn their lessons quietly, with dignity if possible. But dignity was a rare commodity for some. It wasn't long before Rick's pride, battered but not defeated, pushed him into one last act of foolishness. Late one Tuesday night, well after midnight, Stallone's phone buzzed with a motion alert. He rolled out of bed, still half in a dream, and checked the security feed. There it was. Rick, hoodie pulled over his head like a high school prankster, creeping through the darkness towards Stallone's charger. Only this time, he wasn't dragging a cable. He was carrying something, small, black, hard to make out. Stallone squinted, leaned closer to the screen. It looked like a portable battery pack, some kind of fast-charging unit. Rick crouched low near the charger, fiddled with wires, his movements quick and clumsy. Stallone felt a slow, measured anger rise in his chest. This wasn't petty theft anymore. This was tampering, vandalism, a violation of not just his property, but of the quiet respect neighbors owed each other in places like this. He tapped Nick's number without thinking, waking his nephew from a deep sleep. "Get over here," Stallone said, voice calm but sharp. "Bring your tools and a camera." Nick arrived within 20 minutes, still pulling on a hoodie over his t-shirt, toolbox banging against his leg. Together they watched the footage live. Rick still hunched in the shadows like a raccoon trying to pick a lock. Nick cursed under his breath. "He's trying to bypass the switch," he said. "Probably thinks if he reroutes the flow manually, he can get a clean charge." Stallone shook his head slowly. "People like him," he said, almost to himself. "They think the rules don't apply because nobody's ever made them stick." He didn't feel rage, not the hot kind that drives men to do stupid things. It was colder than that, heavier. The simple certainty that this man, this neighbor, needed a sharper lesson than passive resistance. Nick set up a discreet second camera with a zoom lens, recording every fumbling movement Rick made. Stallone didn't intervene yet. Timing was everything. They waited until Rick plugged in his portable unit and stood back, expecting his car to start charging. Instead, thanks to Nick's fail-safe design, the system recognized the unauthorized connection and triggered emergency lockdown mode. The charger's LED flashed deep red. A loud siren, like an air raid alarm, blared out into the desert night. Rick froze, eyes wide as dinner plates, spinning in place like a trapped rat. Lights flicked on all down the street. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. Rick yanked the cable, stumbled back, tripped over a landscaping rock, and hit the ground hard enough that Stallone winced in sympathy despite himself. The portable unit clattered beside him, Neighbors emerged onto their porches, blinking sleep from their eyes. Someone shouted, "Is that a break-in?" Another voice, "Call the cops!" Within minutes, the familiar whoop of a Riverside County Sheriff's cruiser echoed down the lane. Rick scrambled to his feet, abandoning the battery unit, and tried to make it back to his Rivian, but it was too late. Flashing red and blue lights pinned him against the stucco wall like a bug under glass. Stallone and Nick watched from the driveway, arms crossed, silent. The deputies questioned Rick under the harsh glare of floodlights. Stallone approached slowly when waved over by one of the officers, handing over the laminated HOA notices, copies of the footage, and the technical schematics Nick had drawn up to explain the anti-tampering system. Rick tried to bluster, to weave some story about misunderstandings and faulty equipment, but the evidence was overwhelming. The abandoned portable unit, the video feed showing his entry, the warnings ignored over and over again. It wasn't just trespassing now. It was attempted property damage. The deputies issued Rick a citation on the spot and informed him that any future incidents would result in criminal charges. Rick didn't protest. Not anymore. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the dusty ground, shoulders hunched inward like a man trying to shrink himself out of sight. Word traveled fast in the gated community. By morning, even the retirees playing chess at the clubhouse were chuckling into their coffee cups. Stallone received more than a few winks and nods that week. Even Bob McIntyre, the HOA treasurer, stopped by with a six-pack of Budweiser and a simple comment. "Hell of a way to guard a Charger, Stallone." Rick put his house on the market within a month. Whispered rumors said he was relocating to Arizona, something about wanting a fresh start and less judgmental neighbors. Stallone didn't attend the open house. He had better things to do. But he did notice, with a wry smile, that the portable Charger Rick had abandoned that night now sat in the corner of his garage, neatly tagged and logged. A memento of pettiness, overcome with patience. Nick, ever the tinkerer, decided to immortalize the whole affair. He built Stallone a small trophy out of scrap aluminum and 3D printed plastic, a mock EV charger with a glowing display that read, "Energy reclaimed, 27.4 kilowatt hours, courtesy of Rick Harrison." It sat proudly above the breaker panel, lit softly every time Stallone flicked on the garage lights. A quiet badge of honor, a reminder that some battles are won not with fists or fury, but with quiet resolve, clear boundaries, and a little cleverness. Life moved on. Stallone returned to his morning coffees, his slow walks through the backyard, his weekend tinkering on the Mustang. Every so often, he'd glance at the laminated warning still posted beside his Charger and smile. Some lessons were costly. Some lessons were loud. But the ones that stuck, the ones people remembered, were the ones paid for, in quiet, undeniable consequences. Rick Harrison had come to the desert looking for convenience. What he found instead was a man who had already spent a lifetime earning respect the hard way. A man who knew the value of protecting what was his, and who had, once again, without throwing a single punch, won